So I'm thinking now about something I haven't thought of before about the brain, the human brain, and the mind. And what I'm thinking is that humans have brains which then produce minds. So the functioning of the brain creates a mind. So now I'm thinking that the same thing surely applies to computers. And I haven't thought about this before, but the operation of a computer creates an operating system, creates a mind essentially. So I haven't realized that a machine like a computer actually actually does have a mind in a limited sense, possibly, because the complexity is not very great. But I haven't appreciated before how computers do essentially have characters, personalities. They have uh, they have an identity of sorts. So two computers next to each other operate basically the same way, but they are separate machines. They are separate identities. And I haven't appreciated before how two computers next to each other are actually in a sense different to each other, even if they're identical in their construction. So computers do have identities of sorts. They have personalities and limited because of complexity, but they are separate individuals. Two machines next to each other may be identical in construction, but they're still separate machines. And it's not just computers that applies to any machine. I haven't appreciated before how two two TVs next to each other, even if they're identical, are actually separate machines in operation. And one can be reliable, one maybe not. So I haven't appreciated before how in the sense machines and whatever, computers what I'm talking about here, they have identities of sorts. Now limited identities because their complexity is not particularly great. But they are still separate machines in how they operate, how they function. I haven't realized before how two machines next to each other may be identical in construction. They are still separate machines with separate abilities and separate functioning. So I haven't realized before how machines which are identical are still fundamentally separate, even though this is obviously the case. But I haven't understood the reality that two televisions next to each other are actually very separate machines, even if they have identical construction. They are separate to each other, even if they're fundamentally the same. Now, this is interesting because it has implications as to what televisions can do and what computers can do. Now, the complexity of a computer is much greater than a television. Still much less than a human, but still surely enough complexity to have an identity of sorts, an operating system which gives them an identity. And of course different computers can operate in different ways, even if they're constructed the same way. So I haven't appreciated before how computers do essentially have characters, personalities, they have identities. They are complex enough to have identities, separate identities to each other, even if identical in construction. So this has implications as to what extent these computers have minds. Now, computers obviously have operating systems which are produced as a function of the operation of their construction. So, is it correct to say that a computer does have a mind of sorts when in operation? Is it correct to say that a computer operating system is essentially a mind of sorts? This does seem to be the case, and it is interesting to see things this way, and I haven't appreciated this before. So two computers next to each other, even if identical in construction, are actually very, very separate machines, very separate things. They have separate identities, and I suppose separate abilities, even if identical in construction. It is interesting to see things this way. Two identical machines, computers, next to each other are actually very separate machines. They have very separate characters, very separate identities and operating abilities. Now the differences in computer operation is limited because complexity is limited. But it's interesting to realize that computers are not identical, even if they are built identically, in the same way as people are different, even though biologically we're identical. I haven't appreciated how computers can be separate, are separate from each other. And the same applies to other machines as well, but they're far less complex. It is strange to see how computers are complex enough to have identities, to have a character. It is strange to see computers in this way. it's hard to know to what extent a computer would have a mind as a result of their operation. But it is the case, it seems to me, that computers do essentially have minds. And two computers next to each other, even if built identically, are actually very separate machines, in the same way as two people next to each other are very different. It is strange to see things this way, that computers do essentially have personalities, they have identities of sorts. It is strange to see things this way, that computers are complex enough to have identities. Now, the implications of this are quite serious. It's difficult to treat computers as just machines if we appreciate the fact that they do have identities of sorts to a limited extent. And I suppose as the computers become more complex, then their identities will become more complex as well. So a computer does have an identity of sorts, and I'm still thinking on what the implications with this may be. It is strange, and I have a lot of thinking to do, I think.